In episode 5, Rick finally received his gory retribution after years of tracking down the guy who killed his wife throughout all universes, an evil version of himself known as Rick Prime. As the season draws to an end, one more episode highlights Rick's late wife Diane and provides more insight into her personality than ever before. It's time for Rick and Morty Season 7 to wrap up with its final episode. The show has had an incredible journey through the fall. So far, the episodes of Rick and Morty Season 7 have been difficult to predict because they have ranged greatly from being a singular, absurd journey to significantly advancing the canon. However, every episode has aimed to bring attention to fresh facets of every character, and Rick and Morty have experienced several transformations preceding the last installment. Prior to the Season 7 finale, Rick and Morty had to undergo a number of significant experiences, but this last episode presents them with their greatest test yet as they are forced to look inward for the first time. The conclusion of Rick and Morty Season 7 takes the pair to some crazy places as it challenges them to face each other's darkest fears and go down into a fear hole. Here's what happened in Fear No More, the 10th episode of Rick and Morty Season 7. Despite becoming hardened by all of their experiences, Rick and Morty are disappointed by everything they encounter as they stroll through a carnival of nightmares. They accept to accompany a mysterious man dressed in a black suit when he approaches them and offers to take them to a location that is even frightening. Before long, he brings them to a Denny's, where a worker informs them about the fear hole located in the men's restroom. It quickly becomes clear that when people fall into this hole, it represents their worst fears, but they emerge unscathed. While Morty thinks it will eliminate their worst fear, Rick and Morty decide to jump in the fear hole, which feeds on their terror. Morty goes in first, surprising Rick, and Rick follows suit. Rick and Morty jump out of the hole together after Rick helps Morty fight off some terrifying creatures inside. As they are triumphantly making their way back home after overcoming the hole, a younger Rick who is clutching Diane breaks through the roof. Rick orders them to tend to Diane, who was on the verge of death. Rick and Morty deduce that this is probably still inside the fear hole, while the Smith family responds in shock. In an attempt to determine whether this is the result of a possible double swerve and that they have returned to reality, Rick hypothesizes that the reason for this is because Morty's biggest concern is that Rick would never need Morty again if he manages to win Diane back and find happiness. Rick thus delves entirely into the notion to see how it holds up. Rick snidely informs Diane and Beth that since they are inside the fear hole, none of them are real, as they attempt to make sense of the situation. Following their argument, Morty comes to the conclusion that Rick's biggest concern is that he will somehow get another opportunity with Diane and blow it. The following day, in an attempt to make up, Rick builds Diane a breakfast-serving robot that sings and has arms that are derived from a robot he had constructed when they first met. Diane is temporarily won over by this. It's an emotional reunion as Rick, Diane, Summer, and Beth go to the zoo. Morty wonders if Rick has a deadline for experimenting with becoming closer to Diane. Rick, though, seemed clueless. As Morty watches over them, Rick and Diane enjoy time together and become closer. They even go out drinking, which serves as more evidence of the initial attraction between the two. Rick acknowledges that she has passed away in all realities, which is why he has been afraid to lose her once more. However, she encourages him to embrace the present moment because nothing is true in the end, and they develop a loving connection. Rick appears somewhat ill when Morty discovers him shortly after. It appears that the fear hole is feeding on him. Morty surmises he's truly frightened of seeing Rick die, but Rick ignores his concerns and assumes he's not the real one. Morty returns to the Denny's in an attempt to escape the fear hole in order to talk to the main man wearing the black suit. In an attempt to discover what Rick's genuine fear is, Morty is met with a man in a black suit who answers all of Rick's queries and riddles and raises issues about love and whether or not individuals who are in love eventually lose their individuality. In any case, the anxiety remains the same. They have a happiness that never lasts because it always ends in death. Morty's way of handling things is to just let himself get afraid as the man in the black suit threatens to kill Rick. Morty finds a spider that Jerry is frightened of, picks it up, and lets it crawl into his mouth to set the scene, in an attempt to incite enough terror to feed the hole before it engulfs Rick entirely, as it responds to Morty's heightened anxiety. Morty then chooses to experience more of his worst fears, such as being rejected from school. Morty goes there after that and begins to divulge his most embarrassing truths. Morty offers to play the lead in a school play to assist push the hole over the brink as it begins to tremble while he humiliates himself. Diane, meanwhile, begins to act strange when she spends time with Rick, who is starting to appear ill. When Rick confronts him in a fit of rage, he discovers a sick-looking Morty, who has subsequently gone on stage entirely nude to draw jeers, and Rick finally realizes they are both dying. Rick is terrified of losing Diane, even though he knows he must help Morty and part from her. Diane, however, wants Rick to stay in the Fearhold since she doesn't want him to kill her once more. To assist Morty overcome his nervousness, Rick says farewell to Diane and then storms onto the stage, naked of course. The Fearhold's illusion begins to dissipate as Rick and Morty both feel relieved and accepted, and they manage to leave, only to discover that they still need to escape the Fearhole. The Fearhole cycle repeats itself multiple times as they argue over what their true worries are. They choose to move on despite their fear of not knowing if they are still in the hole, trying to play off that ambiguity. A montage of the years shows how time goes on. Rick and Morty continue to have outrageous experiences and gradually get happier with their life. After graduating from college, Rick struggles against the effects of aging, Summer gets married, the Smith family moves out, Morty moves into a new home, and all of a sudden he notices in the mirror that he has become his father, that he remains in the Fearhole. This time, as they emerge, Rick tries to console Morty by telling him they'll try again and that Morty is special. However, it ignites a light within Morty. Morty comes to the realization that he fears Rick will never come clean or say anything similar to him in real life. Morty realizes that Rick never entered the hole with him at this point, since he knows that Rick is the type of person who would just wait while something similar happened to him. After thanking Morty for letting the Fearhole feed on his anxiety about depending on Rick, Morty finds himself waking up in the same hole he fell into. He tells Rick that he never dived in since you can't face two people's anxieties at once. Rick asks how it was. That's just not how it would operate. When Rick is unable to respond to Morty's question about if he is irreplaceable, Morty gives him a hug since he knows he will return. Morty emerges from the hole and declares everything is well. Rick is intrigued even more when he is told not to enter because of the many disturbed mental things that are there, especially after learning that Diane is there. Rick almost jumps in, but he decides against it and adds a picture of Morty to the wall honoring those who entered the hole. Mr. Poopy Butthole returns to finish out Season 7 after the credits. After admitting to robbing Rick of his portal rifle, he travels to a different reality where Mr. Poopy Butthole is still contentedly married and raising a family. The episode concludes with Amy in this universe casting a suspicious glance at him after he is replaced.